Hi everyone, and welcome back to Crosswires. I'm James, and this is a podcast where we talk about technology and look at the ethical side of tech and look at issues as well as just the latest tech news. Or in fact, instead of just the latest tech news. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the value of apps and the scourge that is piracy. That was an intentional pun there, folks. So I've got a wonderful guest who's very kindly agreed to come and talk to us as an indie dev who you may know from his wonderful apps pCalc and Dice by pCalc, and soon About by pCalc. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome James Thompson.
Thanks for having me on. Always happy to come on podcasts and talk about myself. I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world.
Absolutely. So thank you. Yeah. So pCalc, the clue's kind of in the name. It's a calculator app, but tell us a little bit about pCalc. Why would people maybe want to use this above and beyond the standard calculators? And what do you think makes pCalc unique?
Well, I mean, one of the things is that pCalc has been around an awfully long time, and I've put it on just about every Apple platform going. So, you know, it's on the watch, it's on the television, it's on the Mac, iPad, iPhone, everything. But I think that the reason that people might want to use it is that it generally goes beyond the kind of things that Apple does. So it's very configurable, and you can create your own custom conversions and things like that, or custom button layouts. And RPN is kind of a thing that a lot of people use, which the Apple's Mac calculator does have that, but not on their phone calculators and things. And that's very popular with engineering types. And it's kind of, I don't want to call it a pro calculator, but I guess, you know, that's kind of the way of looking at it. And yeah, and it's been around so long that, you know, I think people have heard of it. It came, there was a point where it was actually bundled with the Angle Poise iMacs, at least in the States. So every one of those that got sold, there was a copy of pCalc on it as well.
Oh, so the G4?
Yes, the G4. Oh. So I have a particular fondness for that machine, just because we got some licensing money for that as well.
I do remember when Apple used to put third-party apps, because obviously pCalc on the G4, and then was it Comic Life on later?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot. You used to get, when you bought something like a Performer or whatever, you would get like a folder with about 20 CD-ROMs in it, or of like all sorts of different things, and then you'd get, maybe you'd get, I don't know, graphic converter, that kind of era of stuff that would be on the machines. But, you know, Apple, as we know, likes to control all aspects of their products. And so, you know, it's those days have gone.
Yes. So I will always hold Apple to account when they do something wrong. But what I will say is, when you get a new Mac now, the software that you actually get in terms of iWork, well, I was going to say iWork, but we don't call it iWork anymore. Pages, Numbers, Keynote, and the Photos app. I do, and of course iMovie.
And GarageBand, which is very good as well.
Yeah, and, you know, look, Apple make a lot of mistakes, and I know that they're probably not, I mean, maybe it's a question. In fact, we'll come to that a little bit later about working, in terms of being a developer working with Apple. So, one of the reasons I invited James onto the show was because he'd actually put out a tweet about someone asking for support for pCalc, and I think, had you gone back and forth at this point?
Yeah, we'd had a few back and forths, and I was trying to work out what was happening, because pCalc on the Mac, there's a main app and there's like a little menu bar widget app, and it sounded like they weren't communicating properly and it wasn't starting up right. And I was like, this is very strange, you know, what's going on here? And we went back and forth, and then I had a thought, and I said, and I tried to say this in as non-judgmentally way as possible, but I said, did you get this downloaded from the App Store? And they said, no, I got it from a WhatsApp group I'm part of. And it should be pointed out that the only place that you can buy a copy of pCalc is through Apple's App Store. And so by asking the question in that way, I knew if the answer was not yes, then they had not indeed paid for it. And I think the reason that the things weren't working was specifically because this was some cracked Russian version of the app, which they had broken the code signing on the little helper app, so it couldn't. Things weren't working properly, and anyway, it was. I mean, the thing is, I tweeted it because I shouldn't do things, but I tweeted it because I was just really annoyed because I just found out that moment. So I was like, onto Twitter, complain. And, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't a big deal. It was annoying in the moment. But then lots and lots of people replied and said, oh, this is terrible. I've put an extra tip in the tip jar for you because of this. And so our next day sales were significantly higher than they would have been normally. And then I felt guilty because I just made a bunch of money because I complained about this guy. But yeah, it's kind of, that was a new one for me. And also I said to the person, so, you basically, you pirated it. And they were like, yeah, but it used to work before, they said. And it's like, you're not really getting the point of this conversation here.
You're asking for support from the guy who made this app on an app that you've. I mean, look, there's no other way. I'm somewhat blunt on piracy now. I will be very transparent. When I was younger, particularly back in my Amiga days, I used to pirate software because
I think everybody did, and I mean, I did. I that is absolutely true, because. When I was 19 or whatever, it's like, I'm not going to be able to buy a copy of Photoshop. Let's be honest here. And so I messed around with software, and yes, occasionally things were slightly less than legal. And I think that is absolutely fine. I think I'm not telling everybody out there to pirate my apps. I would like it if people paid for them, but if people are starting out or they can't afford it, or there's a wide range of reasons why piracy is fine. I think if you are in the position to pay for software, you should, because I mean, for somebody like me, it's just myself and my wife. We're not like Microsoft, we're not Apple. It's just the two of us, and literally all the money is paying our bills and keeping us going as a company. So if people stop paying, the software ceases to exist. And it's really that simple. So, and there's I'm not saying you should rip off giant corporations either, but there's a lot of small developers out there and small creators in many fields, where, it is their livelihood.
Yeah. So I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And, a bigger corporation like Adobe, they aren't going to notice piracy as much. And, without getting too far down the whole subscription versus upfront payment thing, Adobe do make it rather difficult to get their apps. I know an illustrator who is, she's a freelancer, and she purchased a standalone copy of Photoshop and everything, all the other tools she needed. Of course, Adobe don't make that possible anymore, and the only way for her to now get newer versions is to pay a subscription. To be honest, it's why I use Affinity Designer. It's why I use Affinity Photo, because they are upfront purchases. It's why I use Final Cut. I pay. So go on.
No, I was just going to say, I use Photoshop and Illustrator an awful lot for my stuff. So, and I've been using them for 30 odd years. So I do pay their subscription things. I'm not, particularly keen on subscription pricing models. I mean, I'll come back to this in a second. There are some legitimate reasons, but maybe I'm just I'm making up for my early days of my slightly less than legitimate copies of Photoshop by paying them an awful lot more now. I mean, one of the things with subscriptions is, from a developer point of view, it does give you that regular income, because Apple hasn't really made any other way. Back in the old days, you would do an upgrade. So you would have, a version 2, and you might charge a $5 or $10 upgrade to go to that version. And there's no mechanism for doing that easily, at least in the App Store. I mean, you can do things like you can create a new app that's called, call it Peacock 5, and then you get rid of the old app. But then the problem is all the kind of like reviews and the placement in the App Store and all that, that's all gone. And that's never really a good thing, because getting visibility on the App Store is hard at best of times. So yeah, subscriptions does give you this means to have a more predictable income, and to have an ongoing income, especially if you're working on an app and, you know, developing it and updating it for the new OS and everything. It would be nice to have that regular income. As a customer, I absolutely hate subscriptions, because I want to pay. You know, I'll buy version 2 and then maybe I don't need version 3 or version 4. I'll just make do with version 2 because, you know, it's fine. It still works. And then version 5 comes out and, you know, the M1 Macs are out. And it's like, oh, well, I'll upgrade to that. That's fine. But you can't really do that kind of way of thinking anymore. So, I have that very mixed thing. I understand from the developer's perspective why people want subscriptions. I also understand from the customer perspective why people don't want subscriptions. But it is also a way to protect against piracy like this, because, you know, if your app is basically, you need a login to a service in order to use it. I mean, I have not looked, but I am sure that there are versions of Photoshop out there that have had all the, you know, the Creative Cloud hooks stripped out of it and whatever. But really don't download random software off torrents and install it on your computer these days, because you don't know what you're getting, and you could end up with, at the very least, you know, Bitcoin miners and all sorts. But at the very worst, you know, it's like there's an awful lot of malware out there, and I do not personally recommend getting PCalc off WhatsApp groups either.
I mean, not to mention the fact it's WhatsApp. Let's not go down that path. But
yes.
I mean, you know, if you're going to pirate PCalc, at least pirate it on Signal, eh?
Yes, be secure. But yeah, it's really, it's a difficult thing, because I don't know the situation of this guy that I was talking to. No. I don't know if he was 16 or 46. You know, it was merely, he was an example of the kind of things that we occasionally run into and deal with. And you get that every now and again. And you get the other thing that I see a lot of is people saying, oh, I work for so-and-so magazine, you know, and we'd like to do a feature on you. Can I get a promo code? And it's like, it's weird that your email address is, you know, trying to think, like TechCrunch journalist Bob at gmail.com. I'm not sure that you are actually working for the TechCrunch at all. So I normally say to people like that, it's like, well, you know, email me from your work account, and I'll happily, you know, send you a promo code. They never do. And you do, the other thing that gets me, and, you know, this is bad, is you do get a lot of people who say things like, you know, I am in poor financial situation because I'm a student, or, you know, I've lost my job, or a variety of things, and I can't afford it. And the problem is, I've had so many of those that are clearly fraudulent attempts to get copies. I am sure at some point somebody has emailed me who is, you know, genuinely in that case, and I have, you know, possibly been more suspicious than I should be, because you're dealing with these other people. So it's like those people are actually hurting the people who might legitimately have a reason. Because, you know, if somebody did email me, and, you know, I've definitely given copies to people before, but there is this part of me that's like suspicious.
So I think, you know, when we talk about app pricing, what often bothers me is when someone says, oh, I can't afford this app, I can't afford PCalc, or I can't afford Tweetbot, for example, because Tweetbot's a wonderful Twitter client. Although they've gone yearly subscription pricing now.
Yes, they have. Which,
again, I can understand. Again, it goes back to that whole issue with upgrades. It's It's never been easy. And Apple, if anyone from Apple's listening, which I doubt they are, come on, guys, sort it out. It can't be that hard.
They've had like 14 years to do this. It's clear that there is somebody, and I'm not going to say it's Phil Schiller, but it's probably Phil Schiller, who decided that isn't the way they want to do it. And they want to move, ultimately subscriptions and that kind of revenue. Because, I mean, the other thing is, like, while subscriptions are, great for, as we were saying, for developers and getting regular income, they're also great for Apple for getting regular income. So.
Yeah, because of Apple, the only way right now, despite everything that's going on in legal land, the only way to do in-app purchases in your apps is through Apple's system. I have a view on that. We might come to that. But the problem is you say, I can't afford this, but yet you'll go out and buy a Starbucks coffee, extra venti with all the shots, everything, and you'll spend, on British pricing here, £6-7 on that and a muffin,
When Peacock started, it was $20. And when the App Store came along, I was like, well, $20 is quite a lot. Or it feels quite a lot for what the App Store's doing. So I will, cut it in half to $10 for the iOS and then eventually the Mac version. But now, like, that seemed to be the standard price for an upmarket utility at the start of the App Store, which I hate to think is like 15 years ago. And now $10 is like ultra premium or whatever, because the pricing model of the App Store has kind of been pretty bad. But I have not reduced the price. And I kept it at 10, and then at one point, as an experiment, I reduced it to 5, and sales went up, but they didn't go up twice as much. So what that was telling me is, like if you the actual amount of money that I was bringing in was less at the lower price. So, well, I'll keep it back at $10, and I think it helps to a certain extent because it gives it a premium feel or whatever, which I don't know how true that is or not, but I think that helps because you're looking at a ton of free stuff and then some things at 1 or 2, and then Peacock is up the top end of that. I don't like that the top end is where my low end started in this business, but that it's not just software that's happened to. It's like the entire media landscape has changed in the last couple of decades, and it's very hard to make money as a journalist, for example, or as a musician, or a lot of these creative industries. It's some people seem to be making a lot of money in record companies and whatever, but it's not the actual artists that are making the money. Not that I consider myself an artist. I just wish to point out.
You've sort of made a point before we started this about, well, what about the devices you're running? So,
yeah,
what do you mean?
I mean, it's like the Apple's gear is not cheap. You've spent £500 to £1,000 on a phone, or you've spent £1,000 to £4,000 on a laptop, and but £10 for a bit of software or whatever it is too much. Now, I get, for some people it is too much, but there is just this voice at the back of my head that's like, why, if your money is really that tight, why did you buy, a £1,000 phone? And I know that's not necessarily the most charitable view of me, but I do think that is, you try and remove all your kind of like biases and prejudices and whatever when you're dealing with people, because you're like, I am a business, I'm running a business. I am trying to be as open about things as possible. But sometimes people will email you and you're just like, you have a kind of emotional response to the way that they've written some email or something, and you're trying to write a polite email back to them, but you're cross because of something they've said or whatever. But yeah.
I think that's not unique, unfortunately. You know, if I've been in support roles for a long time, and sometimes with email, in your head, that they're not attacking you personally.
Yeah.
They don't know who you are. They don't know anything about you. But that email that says, "You idiot, you've done this wrong," or "I hate the thing that your company's built," it still hits because it's something that I'm guessing probably far more so for yourself as a developer than me just supporting an app that, is a job. It's something you've worked hard on.
I mean, if somebody attacks my software, I should not get my entire personal validation from the software that I've written, kind of thing. There is a point where you're too emotionally tied up in your own work or whatever. But somebody criticizes my stuff, I do feel like it's a criticism of me because, I've built this thing. And, Peacock, I don't think we've said really, but Peacock, I started it at university in 92. So it is in its 30th year this year. So this December, it's going to turn 30.
Wow.
And so I've been doing this for a long time. So if, people are unhappy with an element of it, it's like, I've been making this for more than half my life. If you don't like it now, well...
So correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, unless I'm mistaken, if Peacock started in 92,
yes.
Does that mean you've been through 1, 2, 3, 4?
4 processor transitions, yes.
4 processor transitions.
So 68K Motorola to PowerPC to Intel to ARM. And some of the code that is still in Peacock existed in that early 92 thing. There's variable names and function names and stuff which are literally the same. It's not 100% the same code because when it was first written, it was Pascal. And I hand converted some of that Pascal into C, which is the kind of core logic to the app. But yeah, some of that code is still around. And I've seen kind of it also should be pointed out that 92 was pre-web. The early versions were distributed on FTP servers and, through Usenet stuff. So it's kind of, it's not like I've been there since the beginning, but I've certainly been there a long time to see the various transitions that the industry's done. And I have done other things in the meantime. It should be said, I've not been writing a calculator for 30 years. I wrote an application doc called Drag Thing that was quite popular, at least for some time. And I had 4 years working for Apple in the middle of that, and I had other jobs as well. But, for the last 22 years, I've been completely independent since leaving Apple.
Which is you've seen everything. We talked about it. You've seen the App Store develop. Now, I guess the question is obviously on iOS you have no choice but to be on the App Store.
Yeah.
If I'm okay to ask this, what made you decide to go Mac App Store exclusive?
So there was when the App Store came along, I put Peacock on the App Store, but I was also selling it through Kagi, who were a payment processor company, who are no longer with us. But at the time, with Peacock 3, you could buy it either way, and I had 2 links on my webpage, and it was click here to buy it through Apple, click here to buy it, whatever. And it got to the stage where it was 80-90% was coming through the App Store. And clearly, for whatever reason, people preferred that way, or they found it more easily that way. And I mean, I think there is one thing about the App Store that, people trust Apple and trust the credit card processing side of this. And Kagi were a good company, but you are still putting your credit card details into a web page, and there's something about that feels slightly less, secure in some way. And so at that point, it was when I was working on Peacock 4, I had the opportunity to kind of reset things a bit, and I decided I was just going to sell through the App Store. And I mean, also, the majority of our sales are the iOS version. Like it's about 80% to 20%. It's actually, that's probably not true now, but like it was for a long time. The Mac app has had kind of a bit of a resurgence of late because I did a bunch of things to it, like being able to edit layouts, which was something that was only on iOS, and the aforementioned menu bar widget. Really, it was kind of to do the selling through Kagi. There was a lot of infrastructure around that, and sort of even just dealing like with the tax side of that and having to declare things and whatever. And Apple makes that really simple because you're selling in like whatever it is, 188, I'm guessing, countries. Right, it's something. I was looking at it recently. And you're selling that, and you don't have to deal with like getting paid in, Canadian dollars or something like that. You will just get paid in your local currency, and Apple deals with an awful lot of stuff. And they've also got, I don't want to sound like I'm advertising for Apple, but they've got the small business program, which means that their cut is 15%. If you make less than $1 million a year, which I will say we make less than $1 million a year by quite a lot. If I was making more than $1 million a year, I would be happy paying the 30%. But anyway, if you're less than $1 million, you pay 15%. And honestly, in my book, 15% for all the stuff that Apple does and dealing with a lot of it, that's worth it to me. There are some downsides because Apple is kind of, for legitimate privacy reasons, we don't get a list of the customers. No. So I don't know who's bought the software. So all I get is like, get told, well, you sold 10 copies in this country and 20 copies in this country. But it means that there's not that as direct a connection to your own customers. So, you don't have email addresses that you can send them like a newsletter or anything like that.
Or an onboarding email.
Yeah. But I mean, there are ways to do that kind of thing. If you are doing a subscription thing, you can sign people up for newsletters. I think that's something that Apple added recently. They're happy to do that kind of thing. But there is this kind of, I feel more disconnected from my customers than I did, like 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, which is kind of I can see that it's a bad thing in a way, but it's like I would see celebrities buy a copy. And, it would say so-and-so, pick an example, Matt Groening, the Simpsons guy. Yeah. He bought a copy. And it's like, oh, I've got an email address and a physical address. I probably shouldn't have that. And so, you can see why Apple would say, don't pass those kind of details on to the developers.
So I do understand it from that point of view. The one thing I've definitely seen a lot of, and this is just coming from someone reading App Store reviews, is you tend to find people using the App Store reviews as trying to get support. And it's not what it's meant for. But I guess it also is, unless you've built in really good support into the app, people just go to the App Store reviews and like, oh, this isn't working the way I think it should.
Yeah, I mean, I try and put like a fairly visible email button that does an in-app email, and that works. I think that's probably, we do get some people doing things, and at least now you can reply to App Store reviews, which you couldn't do before. So you can reply, and most of the time, if somebody says, oh, this is really broken, you can say, well, this is a known problem, and it's going to be fixed in, version 351, which should be out on Tuesday. And generally, when the thing comes out, people will change their review and say, it's fixed now, thanks very much. And, and most of the time, if somebody has a question or something and you reply to it, they will update their review. The reviews are interesting because if you have a paid app, like $9.99, you can't leave a review, obviously, unless you've paid for it. So there is that filters out certain low grade of reviews. Mm-hmm. And if you have a free app that's like in-app purchase to unlock stuff or subscription or whatever, people can leave a review. They can just download it for free and leave a review instantly. So like Peak Out Lite, which is the free version of Peak Out on iOS, which is a perfectly nice functional calculator, no adverts, works on an iPad. Unlike Apple, I did do an iPad calculator. One day they're going to do it, but I say that every year. Anyway, point being, it's a free thing. It's got no adverts. It's quite nice. It's got way lower star rating than the main full app, which costs $10, which does do more things. But, I think just by virtue of being free, people will download it and, they can then leave a review. I try not to read the reviews. I mean, I do. And mostly my wife will read the reviews, and then if there's some technical thing or whatever, because I don't want to see necessarily the reviews. It's like, actors reading the reviews of their play or whatever. You don't really want to do it from a mental health point of view. Most of the time people are very nice, but occasionally you'll just get one and it's like, the thing where you get 1,000 positive messages and then one negative message, and then literally all you can see is that negative message.
And unfortunately, I think, my take on a lot of this stuff is, my view is, honestly, I think in society in general, I think we seem to have dialed down our respect for each other a bit. We seem to have turned that volume down. And it's really sad. And it's, I think, something that, we're sort of talking about in terms of, you've got £1,000 phone, but you won't buy a $10 app. I don't like the word entitled, but sometimes I just see people like, oh, I should get everything for free because I've got this YouTube channel. Well, guess what, folks? This is a podcast. I've got a YouTube channel. I recognise that my numbers right now are not enough to go and start asking brands for things, because I'm very much aware that there's no return on investment for them. I mean, just being very honest, if I said to James right now, and, if we were to say, oh, let's run a competition where, our listeners can get 10 free copies of Peacock, well, actually, I might only have 10 listeners right now, and it's not worth it for you as a developer, being very honest, because you're not going to see an increase in sales. You're probably only going to end up seeing 10 promo codes wasted.
I mean, to a certain extent, yes. I do also think there is a value to the Apple community, which at all scales, I think is worth supporting. And I mean, I do find, we talk about people not wanting to pay for software. What I have heard from people that do software for both iOS and Android phones is that it is much harder to sell on Android. Like people who do a game, for example, that's on both, they'll generally get much higher sales on iOS. And that could be a factor of the people who have iPhones have more disposable income or however it is. But, the Apple community is still actually a good thing and worth celebrating.
Absolutely.
So, if I do not want to be the person that if somebody came to me and said, will you do this thing? I go, look at their numbers and go, no, it's not worth my time or whatever, because that is a person that I don't want to be. I don't want to be the person who believes they're on hype. But, it is difficult. I mean, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
I think the point, I maybe misphrase that, but the point is that I think people need to be very much aware of what they're asking. Is it reasonable to ask these things? And I think, again, it just goes back to this, think about that attitude of, I won't pay for an app, but I'll pay for this. Or, you know what? Sometimes it's okay to wait to get an app. I mean, so I'll be really honest, because I'm not working at the moment, I want to upgrade to Audio Hijack 4. But I'm going to wait until I have the income to do so, because then I feel that I can properly support Rogue Amoeba, who are a wonderful bunch of people. We both use Audio Hijack for recordings, and I want to support other devs. Now, we talked earlier, just to wrap things up, because I'm aware that because of some audio issues we've had during this podcast, which hopefully you guys won't hear, I don't want to take up too much more of James's time, but subscription model can work really well when you've got services tied to that. So, as much as people may not like the way that a certain password manager is going, I find real value in their subscription offering, because, especially their family plan, because it helps me keep my family safe, and other things like my Plex Pass, because it gives me all the extra features like TV recording, live TV recording on my Plex server.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's subscriptions are a much harder sell for something like pCalc, which is a standalone utility that, there is work involved every year in keeping it up to date and adding new things and all that, but it is less of an obvious candidate, I would say, for a subscription.
Because, of course, Apple have just announced WWDC this year.
Yeah.
And, of course, that must be sending you into panic mode, like, oh, no, what are they going to break this year?
I mean, there is, literally every year, there is a mix for WWDC of the kind of, excitement to see what they're introducing and what it all mean and things. And, this year, we might get some completely new things like AR headsets or whatever. But then there is the fear of, are they going to Sherlock my app? For listeners who don't know the term, it's basically when Apple creates a thing that makes your third-party software obsolete, which is named for Sherlock 3, which I think we can charitably say had a feature overlap with a bit of software called Watson, which was a third-party app. And so the term Sherlocking came along. I also worked on Sherlock 2 for a weekend, but that's another story. But yeah, so, you do have this fear of what's broken, how much do I need to do, things like that. And sometimes it has to be said, the most boring WWDCs are kind of the good ones, because it's great, I don't need to rewrite half the app. I can actually concentrate on doing other things that I want to do rather than spending all my time chasing some new feature that Apple has added.
So my final question before we kind of wrap up is, one thing I have been curious about is, we don't need to go into too much detail, but how long did it take you to get pCalc for the Mac sort of sorted for the M1? Is it Universal 2 they're calling it? Is it? Because PowerPC to Intel was Universal, this is Universal 2.
I can't remember there's so many branding names that Apple reuses. I discovered an advert. I was going through old 80s computer magazines from my parents' attic, and I found an advert for the Apple III, which talked about this fabulous technology they had called Catalyst, which is a term that Apple are now using again for the running iOS apps on the Mac. And it was clearly this was something that they had in their little trademark drawer, and they were oh, we can reuse that. Anyway, Apple does that a lot. How long did it take me to get it running on the M1? I will tell you, it took me longer to expand the copy of Xcode that added Apple Silicon support than it did to add support for the M1. I literally just clicked checkbox, said compile, and it all worked. I did nothing.
Wow.
Not everyone is going to have that experience, but if you have relatively modern, high-level code, most of the time this stuff is... It was a lot harder going, PowerPC or 68K to PowerPC and PowerPC to Intel, because especially with PowerPC to Intel, you had different endianness on the processor. So data was the wrong way around in memory in some cases, and you had to flip things and whatever. But M1 was the easiest transition by absolute far, because I literally had to do no work.
That's fantastic. And as you said, not everyone's going to have that experience, but honestly, I haven't yet had I haven't had the opportunity to spend enough time with a Apple Silicon based machine. I've played with, my friend's got one, but what a transition, what a product line.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's I have got I will say I have a little Mac Studio sitting on my desk, which is what I'm recording on, and I got it a couple of days ago, and it is tiny and is easily the fastest computer I've ever used.
And you're replacing an iMac Pro, if I understand correctly.
I mean, it is almost exactly twice as fast as the iMac Pro. So, if I'm compiling, and you can do a thing when you're about to submit a build, you do a thing called an archive build, which is basically just compiles all your code, does all the stuff, and gives you a file that you can submit to Apple. And doing an archive build of Dice by pCalc, which is a slightly bigger app, was something like 52 seconds on the iMac Pro and 26 seconds on the Studio. So it was exactly twice as fast. And, it's very impressive that this is like a tiny box, which is just sitting here, that, the fans don't even really spin up when I'm doing any of that stuff. And you can see that it's using 20 CPU cores that are grinding away, doing all the things. So yeah, it's really impressive what they've managed to do. And this isn't the high end machine. This is the mid range. We don't know what Mac Pro is going to look like, but presumably WWDC might at least bring some hint of a Mac Pro.
That's my guess, because they said we're very clear. We've got one last Mac to transition. They also did say we're announcing one last chip in the M1 family. So
yeah, I mean, I think given that the Ultra is two
Maxes, isn't it?
Two Maxes together, I'm assuming that there's going to be an Extreme or something, which is 4 of them. And that is going to be an extremely fast computer indeed. It's like I've been trying some of the 3D stuff on this machine, and I, as well as doing Peacock, I've been doing a variety of things, like you alluded to earlier with Dice by Peacock, which is a Dungeons and Dragons 3D dice simulation. So if you need to roll dice but you don't have any physical dice, it's a way of doing that on your phone or Mac or whatever. And alongside that, I've been experimenting with a lot of 3D graphics things because, of course, the rumor is that Apple is going to be doing all this AR, VR future, and that's where their next big stuff is going to be. So I wanted to learn that. Anyway, running all of those things at maximum settings, like running 6 different windows of 3D graphics, all running at maximum 60 frames a second, like the machine is just sitting there saying, "Yeah, give me a real challenge." So I have yet to make this thing, yet to make it sweat in any way, and I need to like kind of up my game and try and do something far more complicated in 3D and see if I can like find where the limits are.
How many Chrome tabs have you got open at once?
Well, I don't use Chrome because
that's a good shout. That's a good shout.
I try to have as little to do with giant tech corporations that aren't Apple as I can. It's hard.
It is. No, it really is hard, and it's going to be somewhat of a recurring theme on this show, if I'm being honest with you. I hinted at Signal earlier. I am very anti-Facebook. I'm very anti-Google as much as I possibly can be. So we're definitely going to be exploring that, just a sneak peek. Anyway, James, thank you so much for your time. Of course, it now comes to a point where I let you have your obligatory plugs to tell people where to go and find your apps beyond the App Store, and maybe if you want to, where people can stalk you on social media.
Well, the one social network that I will vaguely endorse is Twitter. I'm James Thompson on Twitter, and that's Thompson without a P. And generally, if you want to see my apps, peacock.com has most of them. And that's really it. I turn up on a variety of podcasts in other places every now and again. Some for Relay FM and some for the Incomparable Network. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there will be links in the show notes to some of this stuff.
Absolutely. We'll put links to all of James's apps on iOS and the Mac, obviously Twitter and everything like that. And James, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I do want to say a huge thank you for your patience while we've been recording. It's really been appreciated.
It's not a problem. And the irony is we've had no audio problems in the last, half an hour.
That's what you get. Look, folks, if you ever have audio issues on a Mac, just reboot the thing. Don't just reboot the Mac, honestly. It's much easier.
Yeah, the have you tried turning it off and on again is a line and various things for a reason.
Yes. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Head over to crosswires.net for the show notes. Head over to crosswires.net/YouTube for our YouTube channel. I've just put out our latest video where I upgrade an Apple Airport time capsule, which had a dead drive. It's up and running again. It's doing my backups. It's up there. Of course, you lot can't see that. Follow us on Twitter as CrosswiresMG, and you can email podcast@crosswires.net with any questions. See you soon. Thank you.